This is Gemara Horayos, Daf Gimel, and we're holding on Bezim and Bez. We're about 8 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Papa. Says the Gemara. So we're in the middle of trying to figure out the Shita that argues with our Mishnah. As we finish off the previous year with the understanding that the din of the Mishnah is Reb Yehuda. We go up about another 15 lines. The first one line is Amar Reb Yehuda Amar Shmuel Zu Divi Reb Yehuda, that the din of our Mishnah of Yachid Sha'asa by Ras Bezdin is Potter. That if a person doesn't have Eira because the Bezdin Paskin as such is Potter. Says Reb Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that is Shitas Reb Yehuda. But the Chachamim come along. The Chachamim disagree. And the Chachamim hold Yachid Shasar Bayras Bezdin is Chayiv. So we have a Machlaikas. Our Mishnah is Rav Yehuda. The Chachamim disagree. And we finish off with the learning the source Rav Yehuda is the Miyat Kra of Nefesh Acha Secha Tevishkaga. And the Chachamim disagree. So Amar Rav Papa now comes on Rav Papa, and Rav Papa comments. And Rav Papa says that no, the source that you just taught me, that the Chachamim hold, that a singular person that does a Aveira by Ras Bezdin is Chayiv, says Rav Papa, Mimai. How do you know that the price he just quoted is talking about where a singular person does an Aveira? Maybe the Brisa means, maybe the Brisa is referring to a case where neither the person nor the Bezdin bring a carbon. We were grappling. How do we learn the Brisa? We wanted to say that the Bezdin doesn't have to bring it, but the person themselves has to bring it. And that's the source for Yachid Shasa by Ras Bezdin is going to be Chayiv. Shitas Chacham. Says Rabba, how do you know? Maybe neither is Chayiv. Responds the Gemara. If this is true, if it's true that even the person themselves is potter, like Shitas Reb Yehuda, my Arya Demkadal Rubalechiyuva. Why did the Brisa look for the Mekar to show us that when there's a Raiv, that did the Avera, that l'chiyuva. Is it not inferred that if a miyah was one that did it, that if it came via absak to be chayiv, that if it was a roiv without absak, but the miyah with yad absak, and there, if that was the way of learning the brayso, v'nehedar berisha al miyah dimachayiv. So the first part of the Brisa is talking about Amrisha, is talking about the Miyat, a minority of people. Timachayev v'shigas ma'isol, b'soiv ne'adar, al ruba, l'mechayev v'shigas ma'isa. That would make a lot of sense. That, why would the Brisa first said, why would the Brisa Berisha Nachamal have said the Mechayiv Shigas Ma'isa and the end say again a case of Roiv Chayiv Shigas Ma'isa? Elalav, rather, what must the Brisa be teaching? Midaloi Mahadr Al Miyat Mechayiv Shigas Ma'isa. Since the Tana first looked for a place where there's a Chiyah for a singular person, Ubisaif, and at the end in the first white line, Mahadr Al Ruba Chiyuv Shigas Ma'isa. Shma mina, so that's a raya miyot by ra chayav in hein. That a miyot, a minority, a singular person that does an avera because Bezdin Paskin is indeed chayiv kisvos ira, but shaloi ira v'shigam ma'isa chayavim. That ira is going to be chayiv. So says the Gemara that we clearly have two braysos that are going to disagree. The first brisa, which is going to be like our Mishnah, is going to be the Shita of Rav Yehuda. The second brisa is going to be the Shita of the Chacham. Rav Yehuda is going to be the Shita of Yachid Shaisa Baras Bezin, is going to be Potter. Chachamim are going to be Chayiv. Says the Gemara 2 lines on the bottom. Mechti. Let's try to understand what's going on over here. Tarvayus Tamitanan. We have two Mishnayis that are the stama. Mimaydika Meiser Yehuda Ubasreiser Abanon. How do you know? You have two competing Mishnayis. How do you know the Kamaiser of Yehuda and Basreiser Abanon? Ema Ibcha. Maybe the opposite. Meaning, it's true that we have two different shitais, but how do you know which is which? Says the Gemara, Man Shabbos like the Darsh Miute Kayavna. I'll tell you how I know. Who is the sheet that darshins Miutim? Rav Yehudi, and that's how I'm gonna know that the first price is gonna be Rav Yehuda. It's gonna be Potter. The Tanya Rav Yehuda Mer teaches Rav Yehuda as we turn over to Gimel Amid Aleph Zois Toiras Oila He Harayelu Shleishim Yutim. So because Rav Yehuda is the general shita, now we are seeing the darshins miutim. It makes a lot of sense that the first brisa is as well going to be shitas Rav Yehuda, and not the chachamim. First teretz, second teretz. By same another way of learning it. Adayin ani aimer loy masas mokus like Rav Yehuda. I can still say that what it's not talking about the opinion of Rav Yehuda the Katani. Reva kol shachatu bezdin maybe naidem par. The Rav Yehuda and it was Rav Yehuda Amar Sibur Huda Maisi bezdin loi. It's only the Sibur, not the bezdin. It's not Rav Yehuda. Shvat shachatu maybe in Shiva Parim a second raya. That the second price will be the Chacham and the first will be Rav Yehuda. That really wraps up the end of the previous shir, which is the opinion of Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that the din of our Mishnah is not a din that it goes across the board, but rather it's only Rav Yehuda that holds Yachash Asa Bayras Bezin is Potter, but the Chachamim disagree. Continues the Gemara 8 lines down in Gimel Amar Aleph. Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel comes along, and he says a similar din to Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, in that the Mishnah's din is not a unanimous din, but rather he gives us another name. Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel says, Udivi Rabbi Meir Rav Chachamim Amrina Imrim Yochid Sha'asa Bayras Bezin is going to be Chayiv. Says the Gemara, well, let's understand this. Whom is this Shita? My Rabbi Meir. Says the Gemara, who is Rabbi Meir? My Rabbana de Tanya. Hi Rav Asher Meir Poiter V'Chachamim Chayivim. Says the Gemara, if Bezin made a mistake in their psak halacha and they did such, Rameir says they're part of the Chacham say the chayiv. Says, well, what does it mean? Asu, they did man asu. Even Bezin themselves did it wrong. My time with the Rabbanan the mechayivi. Why, according to the Rabbanan, are you mechayiv? Tani, return to the Brisa. Yachal Bezin Basu Bezin Yachal Chayavim Tamal Aimer says the Brisa. Hakahal beasu. Maisa tali bikal. And therefore there'll be no chiyuv if Bezdin themselves followed their own mistaken halacha and did as such. Ella, so what does it mean also that there's going to be a chiyuv? Hayrai Bezdin asu roiv keal. It means the Bezdin paskin, the majority of the people did such. Well, then the question is on the flip side. My time with the Rameir de Paiter. Why would Rameir say that there is a Petur in this case? Says the Gemara, so alalav hoyroi bezdin va'asu miet kahal. Mamish our case. Mamish our case of what? Yochid sha'asa v'hiras bezdin. That Bezdin paskin, that Amiyah did as such. So what's the machlekes ubahakam mifligi? And this is the machlekes Marsav Rameir od Yachash Baraz Bezdin is Potter. Marsav Chamer Yachash Baraz Bezdin is going to be Chayiv. Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel 8 lines down, showing that the din of the Mishnah is the shita of Rabbi Meir and not the Chachamim. Amar Rav Papa says Rav Papa, similar to as we started today with Rav Papa arguing the way that Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel learned up the Mishnah. Rav Papa comes along and he argues again. The Kuli Alma, I'll tell you, says Rav Papa, Yachash Baraz Bezdin is indeed Potter. Ela bezdin mashlim the roy siber komifti. This is a different machlekes entirely. The machlekes here is if bezdin can be mashlim to the roiv siber. Well, bezdin tips the scale. Mar savar the chamo bezdin mashlim the roiv at sibor. Bezdin themselves could tip it and create that it's a roiv. Mar savar and Rameir holds no. Ain bezdin mashlim the roiv at sibor teretz number one of Rav Papa, and therefore it's not a right to what the dinner of Mishnahs. Viba Yisema teretz number two. Ayra bezdin vasa roiv rubai shalkal. That the case of Mishnah is that bezdin paskind. And what? Roiv of the Kal, listen to Bezdin. Man Chachamim, Rebbe Shimoni Damar Sibor. Who is the sheet of the Chachamim? It is Rebbe Shimon who says, Sibor, Maisi, Bezdin, Maisi, they both bring a carbon. V'yibay saying a third shot. Shevet Jasabras Bezdin. We're talking about a case of a Shevet that followed this psak. Man Chachamim, Rebbe Yehudi, the Tanya Shevet Jasabras Bezdin. Oisoy hashevel chayev. V'yibay a fifth shot. Gon shachatu shisha in Ruben Shalkal. Oishiva afal bisha in a Ruben Shalkal. And who she does that? When Stisa man Rav Shimon ben Elazar he Tanya. Rav Shimon ben Elazar Aimer Mishmai Chatoy Shisha vein Ruben Shalkal. Oishiva afal bisha in a Ruben Shalkal. They're going to be chayev. So 7 different ways of potentially learning what this machlekes will be. Amar Ravasi, on the last narrow line, comes along Ravasi, says Ravasi, let's dive a little bit deeper into the dinim of Paralam Davish al Tzibur. Ubehayra, holach acharoi v'yoyishvei Eretz Yisrael. We want to compute when we have a roiv. Says Ravasi, goes after the roiv of those who live in Eretz Yisrael, not those who live outside. Shenemar v'yashashon be'isei he has chag v'chol Yisrael moika al gadol m'lavei chamas anachal mitzrayim v'nei Hashem b'leikeinu shivas yam v'shivas yam arvas yam mechtig sev v'chol Yisrael moika al gadol m'lavei chamas anachal mitzrayim lamli. Why didn't he both parts of the pasuk shvami? No, hanu dikri kal of hanach loy ikri kal. That is going to be the difference between the two shitos. Says the Gemara Pshit, the following is Pashat. Merubim v'nismatu, continuing in the different parameters of what is called the Paral Dover Shal Tzibur, when we'll have what's called a roiv. Let's say there was a roiv of Klal Yisrael that performed, said Aveira based on Psak of Bezin. So we have a situation that has to be brought to Paral Dover Shal Tzibur. But then in Ismatu, they decree, some of them died, so you no longer have a roiv. But what about on the flip side? Miatan, it's not a roiv. Vinisrabu, and then they increased. And now we have a roiv that's being tricked, that's following this mistaken psak of Bezdin. What do we do now? Says the Gemara, Ma'ikib Ligi, Rav Shimon Rabbanan. Do we say that there's a machlekes? Rav Shimon does Rav Shimon who goes by the moment you find out. Machayev Rabbanan tells the Basar Chatos Patri. Is that how it's going to be? Oiloi, what is the story over here? Responds the Gemara, slow down, 5 lines down. V'tizvra, when does Rav Shimon say you go af? Even Basi Yediyah, not solely Basi Yediyah. Not only after you find out about the mistake, you don't compute the numbers at that moment entirely. It's when the Aveira and the knowledge of the Aveira all happen simultaneously. Would he say such a case? Because if this was true, that according to Rav Shimon, the only way that we would calculate it is only going to be Laisiki Hashta, the Kohen Gadol Nasi that happens right now. And Rav Shimon says the Gemara Chatav Yediyah, you clearly need both. Ibai lehu. So we figured out the parameters. Vom will have a param david shel tzibur. Now 10 lines to the end of the Amud. The first line is Bai. The Gemara has a shaila. Hoyroi bezdin chelev mutter. Bezdin says chelev is mutter, which of course chelev usually is aser. The way to memorize this is ches is chayiv. Chelev is forbidden fats. So Bezdin erroneously paskins that chelev is mutter. V'also mirakal, and the miyat, a minority, unfortunately, is over the avera. And then v'chazru bezdin b'hem, and then bezdin is chayzer. They admit they messed up. V'hayra v'asa miyat acher, and then bezdin again makes a different mistake about a different form of a chelev. V'asu miyat acher, and a different miyat does it. So we have two different times of averos of chelev being consumed based on the wrong psaka bezdin. Says the Gemara, Mara Mahu. What is the story? Do we say kivin the shtei yediyos nenu loy mitzaref? It's two different times. Shtei yediyos. Therefore, they do not combine oidilma. Kivin the idea of the chelev, it's one type, one sugavera mitzaref. They would combine to get the roivim. Tipslam kivin the idea of chelev mitzaref. Miyad bechelev shal gabi akava. Miyad bechelev shal gabi dakin mahu. Different types of chelev. Chelev on the keva, chelev on the dakin. Hachavad, they give the trade costly, come to different psakim, lo mitzaref, therefore there's no tziruf. Or don't give the idea chelev, lo meis is chelev mitzaref. Vem, timsam mishem chelev u mitzaref, miyot vechelev u meyot vedam. 5 lines from the bottom. Mahu, hachavad, they give the trade yisur nenu. 2 different yisur, and given the yisur shav, lo mitzaref, they don't go bano damakivan. The Yisur and Shava, the carbon, on Shav, they have same carbon, Mistarif. Vim, Tim Savi, give the Shav, the government Shava, Mistarif, Miyad, Chelev, Miyad, Vavoid, this Kachavim. Now, do those combine? Ma'o, Chavad, the Inus to Shava, it's not the same Isser, being carbon and Shava, and they don't have the same carbon. Oy, Delmar, perhaps, given that the Karezu, Mistarif, says the Gemara, Gutta, Kashas. Teku, we gotta wait for Eliyahu and Navi to deal with this. 2 lines in the bottom. And the Bezdin dies. Now another Bezdin, and another mistaken sack, and another Avera of Amiyah eating the Chelev. Aliba demanda Amar Bezdin Maisi. If Bezdin is one that brings the carbon when you have the roiv that's over the avera, laiti by the chutz not a shayla. Bezdin maisi laiti by the chutz not shayla dalas nayu, because that bezdin's not here, so of course they can't bring. Elakiti by the chutz, what's the shayla? Alib demand receiver maisi. Then the shayla is my tzibur hakai. Do we say that tzibur is here? Do we say that the two minorities, the two miutim, combined together, and you can have a matziv of a param david shel tzibur, the two miutim combine, and therefore the tzibur will have to bring odama yediyah dahu bezdin dahira beinon. You need a yediyah of that bezdin which doesn't exist. Says the Gemara Nachamol Teku. So 2 fascinating questions: how we create, or more importantly, how we calculate what is a roiv, and we end with a teku. Omar Rav Yonasan, says Rav Yonasan, Meya sheyashvu lahayres. Says Rav Yonasan, 100 dayanim who sit down to dan. Now, why it's 100, whether 100 is dafko, usually you need to have an odd number on a bezdin, is a gutek shailom. The Mefarshim explain. But 100 sit to baskin, and they make a mistake. Ein chayavin ad sheyoyrei kulan. The only time there's going to be a chiyuv aral david shel tzibur is if they all made a mistake. But if, let's say, one dayan didn't say not, but he just kept quiet, then there would be no chiyuv of paral davar. Shnamar gzeres hakosavim koladas yisrael yishgu. The entire congregation makes a mistake. Ashe yishgu kulam, till they all make a mistake. Ashe tivshay tayirah bechol adas Yisrael. So a critical rule when it comes to param davar shel tzibur, it needs to have unanimous libin, a decision that is a mistake in psak halacha. And let's prove this. Amar Rav Huna, Breder Rav Hoshia, 6 lines down, Gilman base. Usually we pass in Ruba Kikulai. And here, normally Rive is enough. But here, what does it say? Kol Aida. Over here, what does it say? The entire congregation. Hey, Nemeya, you need to have a call. Without it, there would be no matzav aparel and davar shel tzibur. Frakti Gemara Tanana Yerabazim Yadachamim Sheto. One of them knows it's a mistake of Talmud V'Rayolay our Mishnah. Balchmas Albi and Ben Shazav Asima and Ben Shazav Asa Achrei and Ben Shazav Asa. Harei Zechayim Moim Mishlotol Bebezin. Hayu Dechayiv. So what's the implication of this in our Mishnah? That this one guy is Chayiv Acher, but another person who did it would be Potter. V'amai Olenigmoira. Why would there be a Ptur in such a case? It's not a Nigmaru Aira. It's never an absolute ruling, because not every Dayan agreed with the erroneous Psak Halacha. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you why. He nodded with his head, and that was enough. One of them knows it's a mistake. You make a mistake, they are Potter from Barrel and Davar Shel Tzibur. So what's the deal? Time, you made a mistake, not so you Potter. Hashasig, but if he was quiet, Mishtak, then he would be quiet. Then Chayavim, then there would be a Chayav, Vigamar La Hayra, and then there would be a Psak Halacha. V'amai, Haloy Hayra, Kul, and they don't all paskin. Says Gemara, Amri Achanam Kim Sheherkin V'Roishai. That's enough to create the unanimous psak by nodding with his head. Master Amr Shar Shia continues the Gemara to ask, Chazal relied on them. They said, Ein Goizin Gizel at Sibur, Elim Kain, Ravitzi Yachal Ba. Less the majority of the congregation stands by the Gzir of Amar Rava Maikera. What pasuk is this? B'meira atem the arim va'oisi atem koivim hagoy kuloi. So says the Gemara. So what do we see from this pasuk? V'achatachsev hagoy kuloi and rubai kekuloi. So tiyafta de Rav Yeina's son. Says the Gemara. It says goy kuloi, and we know that Rav has the din of a kol, and therefore the question is, why do you need kulam? Rav should be enough. Says the Gemara, you're right. To Yofta, this is indeed a good kasha. Well, am I? But if this is true, now we go back around. What was the premise of the whole din? My kol adas the kamar. Why did it say kol adas amrachmana? Says the Gemara, hachi kamar ika kulam. If the entire bezdin is there, haviyara, haviyara. Not that they all had to agree, but they all have to be present. And Amar Rav Yeshua, Yochi Yoshevidin. 10 men who sit in judgment, one chain is not really emotional, is hanging around all of them. They all have the responsibility together. Pshita says, if the rabbi, he is still included and he's held accountable unless he opens his mouth. When Rav Huna would go to Bezdin, Maisi Asara tonight, the Kamei would bring 10 Talmidei Chacham in front of him. So that the Nimtiyan Shiba Mekshura, each would get a little bit of a chip of the beam. They would all share the judgment together. Rav Ashi Kavemaisi Tirefta Likamei, when there would be a treifa, Maisi Asar Tabachim, Maisi Mechasya, Maisi Kamei Amar Kechin, and Amtin Shiba Mekshura. Again, he wanted to share the burden of the Psak Halacha. We'll stop over here, pick it up from the Mishnah, B'siyata Dishmaya.